The day before my 20th birthday, I got a text from my mom that just said, "We're heading to Rome tomorrow to help Olivia with the wedding stuff. There's money in your account for dinner." That was it. No happy early birthday, no we'll celebrate when we're back, not even a damn emoji. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking maybe she'd follow it up with something else, something warmer, or at least some kind of explanation. But nothing came. Just silence. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. No sounds of anyone getting ready in the kitchen, no smell of coffee brewing or the familiar sound of my dad swearing at the toaster. Just silence. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd surprise me later in the day, but that hope faded quickly as I walked into the living room and saw that even the throw blankets were folded neatly on the couch, like they'd been preparing to be gone for a while. I checked the fridge. Bare. Not completely empty, but no sign of anything resembling a birthday cake or a special meal. Just a leftover salad and some expired hummus. I felt this strange weight in my chest, like someone had knocked the wind out of me while I was sleeping. I didn't even get a note. Not a card, not a little post-it on the fridge saying they loved me or that they were sorry they couldn't be there. Nothing. It was like I was invisible. Like my birthday didn't even register as something worth acknowledging. I sat down at the kitchen table, still in my pajamas, and just stared at my phone. I scrolled through old texts from Olivia, trying to remember the last time she'd spoken to me like a sister and not just someone she expected to show up and clap for her latest life achievement. I saw the last message I'd sent her weeks ago, asking how she was doing, and her reply was just a photo of her engagement ring with a caption, "Can you believe it?" That was it. No thanks for checking in, no asking how I was, no follow-up. She'd been swallowed whole by this wedding, and apparently, so had everyone else in my family. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. Olivia was always the golden child. She got straight A's, did ballet until she was 17, and then went off to a fancy college in New York. Every time she came home, it was like royalty had arrived. My parents would clean the entire house, plan out all her favorite meals, rearrange their schedules just to spend time with her. And me? I was the quiet one. The one who didn't cause problems but also didn't sparkle enough to get attention. I went to community college, worked part-time at a bookstore, and mostly kept to myself. I didn't demand much. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe they got used to not needing to care. But this felt different. This wasn't just about forgetting to sing happy birthday or skipping a dinner. This was abandonment. My entire family got on a plane and flew to another continent the day before my birthday without even pretending to care. I checked my bank account. They'd sent me $50. That was my birthday celebration, a sad little transfer with no message attached. I closed the app and just sat there, the weight of everything hitting me all at once. I kept thinking, would they have done this to Olivia? And I already knew the answer. No. If it were her birthday, even if it fell in the middle of a hurricane, they'd reschedule the entire trip. Hell, they'd bring Italy to her if they had to. I spent most of that day in my room, scrolling through social media while my classmates posted pictures of birthday dinners, surprise parties, homemade cakes, even small notes from friends. I didn't post anything. I didn't want the obligatory happy birthday messages from people who'd forgotten until the app reminded them. I didn't want pity. I just wanted to not feel like a ghost in my own house. By evening, I caved and ordered takeout. Chinese. I used the $50 my parents left me like some sort of consolation prize, trying not to choke on the irony of it all. I ate on the couch with the TV on low, not really watching anything, just trying to fill the silence. The fortune cookie said something generic about change being around the corner. I threw it in the trash. No one called. Not even a late-night text from my mom or a quick video message from Olivia. Nothing. I kept thinking about the airport, imagining them laughing together, maybe even sipping champagne in the lounge while talking about flowers and venues and menus. I wondered if my name came up at all. If anyone paused even for a second and thought, hey, maybe we should check in with her. But deep down, I knew the answer. It was my 20th birthday. I was officially 2 decades old, and it felt like the people who were supposed to care about me the most had decided I was just not important enough. I went to bed that night not sad, not angry, but numb. Just numb. And in that quiet, I made a promise to myself, not that I'd confront them, not that I'd try to make them see what they'd done. No. I promised myself that from now on, I'd stop expecting anything. Because nothing hurts more than expecting to matter and realizing you never really did. Olivia was always the favorite, and it wasn't one of those subtle family dynamics where favoritism hides behind good intentions. It was blatant, undeniable, and constant. She was 27, a flawless success story in my parents' eyes, the embodiment of everything they ever wanted in a daughter. She graduated from Yale Law School, passed the bar on her first try, and got engaged to Ethan Bloom, the only son of some West Coast hotel magnate. Their engagement party was in Napa Valley, with catered sushi, champagne towers, and imported orchids. I wasn't even asked to help organize it, I was asked to keep my distance so I wouldn't stress her out. Meanwhile, I was 20, studying early childhood education at a local state college in Portland, juggling part-time work at a daycare center with online classes. I loved it, I genuinely did. Working with kids made me feel purposeful in a way I never felt at home, but to my family, it was just another disappointment. I remember one dinner where my dad casually said, "You really couldn't have picked something more ambitious," while passing me the mashed potatoes. He said it like it was a joke, but there was no warmth behind it. Just thinly veiled condescension. My mom didn't say anything, she just smiled a little, not at me, but at Olivia, who was going on about an upcoming court case and how she was probably not even allowed to talk about it, but what the hell. I never had my own space. Growing up, my bedroom was barely larger than a walk-in closet. It had no real windows, just one narrow slit of glass near the ceiling that let in a dull gray light, and I shared a bathroom with the laundry machines. Olivia's room, on the other hand, was practically a private apartment. She had the biggest room in the house, with an ensuite bathroom, a walk-in closet, and a small balcony. She even got to paint the walls any color she wanted, while I wasn't allowed to hang posters because they damaged the paint. Every time she came home from college or from New York, her room was waiting for her exactly as she'd left it, perfectly preserved, clean, fresh sheets on the bed. Meanwhile, my space was constantly used for storage. Suitcases, boxes, old seasonal decorations, if it didn't have a place, it ended up in my room. It wasn't just that Olivia was the favorite. It was that I didn't seem to register as a real person to them. I was tolerated. I was background noise. When my mom hosted dinners or holiday parties, I was assigned kitchen duty while Olivia was paraded around in designer dresses and introduced like royalty. "This is Olivia, she just made junior partner," my mom would beam, gripping her wine glass like it was a trophy. "And this is our younger daughter," she'd say when people asked about me. No name, no accomplishments, just a vague acknowledgement of my existence. Once, someone asked if I was adopted as a joke because they couldn't believe both girls came from the same family. My mom laughed. I didn't. The emotional weight of that difference settled into me over the years. At first, I tried to earn their attention. I brought home straight A's in high school, joined clubs, even won a citywide art contest when I was 16. My dad's only comment was, "That's nice. But you know art doesn't pay the bills, right?" When I got into college, I told my parents with cautious excitement, but my mom just asked if I was sure I didn't want to take a gap year to figure things out. Olivia, by contrast, got a whole dinner party when she got her first internship. My grandmother flew in from Vermont just to toast her over shrimp cocktails. I started to fade into the background because it was easier than fighting a losing battle for attention. I stopped sharing updates. I didn't talk about school unless asked. When I got my first A in a particularly grueling class on childhood development, I wanted to tell someone, anyone, but I knew it wouldn't matter. It never did. I overheard my dad once saying, "She's sweet, but she doesn't have the drive." Like he'd already decided what my life would look like and wrote me off before I even started living it. Even at home, I felt like a guest. Conversations always revolved around Olivia, her job, her fiancé, her travels, her future. The wedding was all anyone talked about for months. What kind of dress would she wear? Which winery would be perfect for the rehearsal dinner? Would Ethan's parents contribute to the honeymoon fund? No one asked me if I'd be available for any of the events. I was just expected to fit in around the edges, show up when needed, and disappear the rest of the time. The worst part was that I wasn't even angry anymore. I used to be. I used to cry behind closed doors, ask myself what was wrong with me, try to fix whatever I thought was broken. But after years of being ignored, after realizing I could scream and still not be heard, I just stopped trying. It was easier to be invisible than to constantly feel like I was falling short of some invisible standard that Olivia met by simply existing. I wasn't just treated differently. I was disregarded, systematically and consistently, until I internalized it. I moved through my own home like a ghost, present, but unnoticed. They didn't even realize they'd left me behind on my birthday. Or worse, they did, and it just didn't matter. On the morning of my birthday, I stared at my phone screen with the kind of hope that makes your chest ache, thinking maybe, just maybe, there'd be something. A text, a call, a voicemail, even a stupid GIF. But nothing came. The screen stayed blank, glowing with that harsh, indifferent light. My family had flown to Rome the night before, leaving me in Portland without so much as a goodbye hug or a reminder that they loved me. I tried to convince myself that they were just busy, jet-lagged, maybe caught up in time zones or bad Wi-Fi, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew they hadn't forgotten. They just didn't care enough to remember. They were probably sipping cocktails on a rooftop by then, dressed in pastel linen and talking about wedding invitations while I was sitting alone in the house we were all supposed to share. I scrolled through their social media accounts. Yes, I know, self-inflicted pain, but I couldn't stop myself. There they were, already tagging themselves at five-star restaurants in Trastevere, toasting champagne flutes over candlelit tables, plates of Cacio e Pepe and burrata spread out like magazine pages. My sister had her arm around my mom in one photo, both of them laughing with their heads tilted back in perfect unison, like a still from some movie about effortless family love. It wasn't even noon yet, and I already felt like the day was going to crush me. I tried to busy myself, folding laundry that didn't need folding, wiping down already clean countertops, walking from room to room like maybe I'd find something different if I just opened the right door. But the silence was deafening. No laughter. No birthday candles. No one singing or even pretending to care. Around 5 in the evening, my phone finally buzzed. My heart leapt, like some naive part of me still believed they might redeem themselves. I opened it instantly. It was a text from my mom. Not "Happy birthday." Not "We miss you." It just said, "Olivia found the perfect venue. A historic villa outside Florence. It has gardens and a view of the vineyards." That was it. A single sentence, bright and enthusiastic, as if I'd been following every detail of the wedding like it was the only thing happening in our lives. I stared at the words for a full minute, rereading them again and again, waiting for the rest of the message. But nothing followed. She didn't even ask how my day was going. Not a single acknowledgement that it was my birthday. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand why I had to beg for the bare minimum from people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But instead, I just stood there, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. I didn't respond. What could I even say? Great, Mom. Hope Olivia's dream wedding comes true while I eat reheated leftovers alone. I locked my phone and shoved it deep into the couch cushions like I could bury the feelings with it. Later that evening, my best friend Madison came to pick me up. She knew it was my birthday because, unlike my own family, she actually remembered. She didn't have much. She was a student like me, working part-time at a pet grooming place and sharing an apartment with 3 roommates, but she showed up anyway, holding a tiny bouquet of daisies in one hand and a homemade card in the other. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just smiled and said, "Let's go eat our feelings." And somehow, that was exactly what I needed. We went to this tiny Italian place down the block that smelled like garlic and burnt breadsticks, where the lights flickered a little too much and the laminated menus were peeling at the corners. But it felt warm. Real. Human. We split a plate of spaghetti and meatballs and ordered 1 slice of tiramisu with 2 forks. She toasted me with her soda and said, "Here's to surviving shitty birthdays and becoming the aunt who tells kids the truth about Santa." I laughed. I really laughed, the kind that bubbles up from deep in your chest. I smiled through that dinner, and for a few moments, I almost forgot the hollow ache sitting in my ribs. But it came back when I got home. When I walked into the dark, empty house and remembered that the people who were supposed to be my family hadn't even texted again. No call. No voice message. Nothing. Just that one hollow message from my mother about Olivia's dream wedding venue in Tuscany. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my jacket, staring at the wall while the laughter from dinner echoed faintly in my head, already fading. I didn't cry. I just sat there, cold and still, trying to understand how I had ended up in this place where being forgotten wasn't even surprising anymore, it was expected. My birthday came and went, and to them, it was just another day. To me, it was the loudest silence I'd ever heard. The 3 months that followed my birthday felt like one long, uninterrupted broadcast of the Olivia show, and I was stuck on the outside of the glass, watching it all happen like a spectator rather than a sibling. Every conversation in the house, every group text, every weekend errand somehow circled back to Olivia's wedding. Flower samples arrived in big glossy boxes and were laid out on the dining room table like precious artifacts. My mom would hold them up to the light, turning them this way and that, asking my dad what he thought about blush versus dusty rose, and he would nod solemnly as if this were a matter of national importance. They never asked what I thought. They never looked in my direction. I wasn't asked to be a bridesmaid. That had stung in a way I hadn't expected. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was her day and she could do what she wanted, but when I saw the photos Olivia posted from her "Will you be my bridesmaid?" brunch, those curated little boxes with robes and champagne and handwritten notes, I realized just how deliberate my exclusion had been. Even girls she barely spoke to from her law firm got an invite to that inner circle. I wasn't even considered. Not a text, not a conversation, not a glance. No one ever said it out loud, but I got the message. I wasn't there to be celebrated. I was there to help. While Olivia and her entourage went to dress fittings and menu tastings, I was asked, more like instructed, to handle logistics. My mom sent me lists on Sunday nights with small things I could take care of. Set up the place cards. Check RSVPs against the online spreadsheet. Make sure the gift table at the venue was organized and had extra pens for the guest book. I did it all without complaining, because at that point, I'd stopped expecting anyone to treat me like anything other than an afterthought. When the invitations were mailed out, I didn't even get mine handed to me directly. It came in the actual mail, like I was some distant relative they weren't sure would show up. I remember standing at the mailbox, flipping the envelope over in my hands, thinking maybe there was some mistake. But no, it was addressed to me, same gold script as everyone else, tucked inside the same thick cream cardstock with a wax seal that had Olivia and Ethan's initials pressed into it. It looked expensive. Formal. Beautiful, even. But all I could think about was how impersonal it felt to be invited to my own sister's wedding like I was just a name on a list. Then came the seating chart. I wasn't even told where I'd be sitting until the night before the wedding, when I saw a printed layout taped to the wall at the rehearsal dinner. Table 22. I had to squint to find it. It was shoved into a corner at the very back of the reception hall, practically touching the bathroom corridor. When I asked if there'd been a mistake, my mom just said, "Oh honey, there were so many people to fit in. You'll be fine back there. It's quieter anyway." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded and smiled like I always did, swallowing every sharp word that pressed against the back of my throat. The day of the wedding was a blur of chaos and contradiction. Olivia looked stunning, of course, custom gown, flawless makeup, hair twisted into some intricate braid that looked like it belonged in a bridal magazine. Everyone fussed over her like she was royalty. I stood off to the side, holding a roll of tape and a bag of extra place cards, watching as my mother dabbed at her eyes and whispered to my sister about how proud she was. No one asked how I was doing. No one offered to take a photo with me or even said they were glad I came. I wasn't included in the family photos. I wasn't asked to say a toast. I wasn't even asked to stand near them during the ceremony. I floated between tasks like some unpaid assistant, fixing fallen signs, running messages between the coordinator and my mom, moving gift bags out of the way so no one would trip. Every time I passed someone in a pastel dress holding a mimosa, I wondered if they even knew I was related to the bride. During dinner, I sat at table 22, pressed up against a half wall that led to the restrooms, with a view of the kitchen doors swinging open every 30 seconds. The people around me were distant cousins and old co-workers of my dad's, none of whom remembered my name. The music barely reached us. The speeches didn't carry to our end of the room. The cake cutting was a blurry event that I could only see through the crowd standing between me and the dance floor. I sat there in that dress I bought on sale, because no one told me what colors to avoid or what the vibe would be, and listened to everyone toast Olivia, praising her brilliance, her beauty, her grace under pressure. No one mentioned her family by name except for our parents. I wasn't just forgotten. I had been erased. And for the first time in my life, I let myself believe that maybe that was exactly what they wanted. I arrived at the reception earlier than most, not because I was eager, but because I didn't know where else to go. My job with the place cards had been finished hours ago, and no one had asked me to join them for photos or champagne or even a moment to sit and catch my breath. So I found my way to table 22, the one near the restrooms, tucked behind a potted plant, and I sat there in silence, nursing a glass of lukewarm water. The music was playing softly, the kind of polished instrumental version of a pop song that weddings always seem to rely on, but I couldn't hear the melody clearly from where I was. Every so often, someone would breeze past me, dressed in silk, laughing, glowing, and I would turn my head slightly, pretending not to notice how invisible I had become. I sat there feeling utterly small, like a forgotten seat filler at someone else's life. I kept my eyes low, my posture closed, shoulders tucked in as if trying to occupy as little space as possible. I wasn't even supposed to be at this wedding as a guest, not really. I was functionally staff. My assigned seat may as well have been behind the DJ booth or next to the coat check. It was clear that no one cared if I enjoyed the evening. They just needed me to not get in the way. Then, as I was folding and refolding my napkin for the 10th time, a man sat down beside me. Not across the table, right next to me, like he had chosen that exact spot for a reason. He didn't look lost or unsure. He didn't glance at the table number or check a phone for confirmation. He looked at me like he had been searching and had finally found what he was looking for. He was tall, dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit that didn't come off any department store rack, and carried himself with a kind of ease that made the room feel smaller, quieter. His hair was dark, his eyes an unreadable shade of gray, and his expression was calm but focused, like he saw something in me that I couldn't. "I've been looking for you," he said simply, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I blinked, startled. "What?" He smiled slightly, just the corners of his mouth turning up. "You're Ava, right? Olivia's sister." I froze, not sure what to say. No one, absolutely no one, had used my name all day. Hearing it spoken so confidently in a voice I didn't recognize felt strange, almost surreal. "Yes," I said slowly, my voice catching in my throat. "I thought so," he replied. "You're exactly where I was told you'd be, unfortunately." He glanced around at our location, next to the restrooms, far from the stage, isolated, and shook his head with something that resembled disappointment but also familiarity, like he understood more than he should have. I didn't know who had told him about me. I didn't know how he knew my name. But he didn't feel threatening. He felt intentional. "I'm Julian," he said, offering his hand. I shook it, still unsure. "How do you?" He stood before I could finish the question. "Come with me," he said, not demanding, not presumptuous, just certain. He looked back at me and added, "You shouldn't be sitting here." And then he walked away, slowly enough that I could follow, confidently enough that I knew I was supposed to. I hesitated for a second, glancing back at the table as if it had some claim on me. My empty water glass. My untouched bread roll. The place card with my name written in someone else's handwriting. Then I stood and followed Julian through the crowd, past tables filled with extended family, law firm colleagues, socialites in heels, women with champagne glasses perched delicately between their fingers. No one looked at me. No one noticed me moving. He led me all the way to the front of the room. Third row. Right behind the parents. Right where the rest of the immediate family was sitting. I stood there for a moment, stunned, unsure if I was dreaming or if someone was about to tell me I was in the wrong place. But no one did. My mother glanced back only briefly when she noticed me standing behind her. Her face flickered with something I couldn't read, surprise, maybe, or discomfort. My father avoided eye contact entirely. Olivia was turned toward Ethan, laughing at something he whispered in her ear, bathed in the glow of the lights and the attention she'd always drawn to herself like gravity. None of them said a word to me. But Julian pulled out a chair and motioned for me to sit. So I did. And for the first time that day, I wasn't in the margins. I was sitting in the same row as the people who had forgotten me. Or ignored me. Or deliberately left me behind. And I was doing it because a stranger had walked across a room full of noise and opulence and said my name like it mattered. The clinking of champagne glasses signaled the start of the toasts, and I braced myself for the usual parade of glowing praise and rehearsed sentiment. Ethan's best man went first, delivering a polished, harmless story about their college days. Olivia's maid of honor followed, gushing about late-night phone calls, dress fittings, and Olivia's endless generosity of spirit. Laughter, applause, the occasional tear, every detail carefully curated, perfectly aligned with the narrative my family had crafted and protected for years. I sat in the third row, still unsure how I'd gotten there, still half expecting someone to tell me it had all been a mistake. Then, without warning, Julian stood. He wasn't listed in the program. He wasn't a groomsman. He hadn't been introduced during the ceremony or mentioned in the welcome speech. But there he was, tall and steady, holding a microphone one of the servers had handed him without question. For a few seconds, the room didn't quite know how to react. People assumed he must be a friend of the groom, maybe a cousin or an old roommate. But as soon as he spoke, the atmosphere shifted. "My name is Julian," he began, voice calm but sharp, every word deliberate. "And I'd like to say a few words, not about Olivia and Ethan, but about someone else in this room who deserves to be seen." There was a flicker of confusion in the crowd. Heads turned. A few people glanced around, unsure who he meant. I felt my stomach twist. He wasn't looking at Olivia. He was looking at me. "I want to talk about Ava," he continued, nodding in my direction without breaking eye contact. Olivia's sister. The woman sitting quietly in the third row, who wasn't asked to be a bridesmaid, wasn't asked to give a toast, and who, just months ago, spent her 20th birthday entirely alone while the rest of her family flew to Rome to plan this wedding. The room began to shift. People murmured. Some looked toward me, eyes widening. I could feel my pulse in my throat, a slow, cold panic rising through my chest. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't known he was going to speak. But Julian kept going, unwavering. "Ava didn't even get a phone call that day," he said. "No happy birthday. No message. Just a text from her mother saying there was money in her account to order dinner." While her family toasted wine in Italian restaurants, Ava sat alone in an empty house. They left her behind, not by accident, but by choice. There was a sudden hush. A dense, electric silence. My mother shifted in her seat, posture stiff and defensive. My father stared at the table. Olivia's smile was gone, her face pale, her jaw tight. "But what you may not know," Julian said, "is that Ava was also left in the dark about something far more serious. Something her family kept from her, intentionally, for over a year." He reached into the inside pocket of his suit and pulled out a folded piece of paper, holding it in one hand like a receipt, a statement, a verdict. His voice remained steady, almost clinical, as he read from it. $300,000, he said. "That's the amount Ava's grandmother, on her mother's side, left her in a trust. It was intended for her education, her independence, her future. It was released after her 20th birthday. But no one told her. No one even mentioned it. Why? Because, as I was told by someone very close to this family, they didn't want the distraction interfering with the wedding." There were audible gasps. One woman dropped her glass. A man near the bar whispered something harsh under his breath. My mother's face flushed with a color I'd never seen before, some mix of fury and humiliation. She stood halfway, as if to stop him, but Julian raised his voice just enough to override her presence without shouting. "They took her money. They took her voice. They took her place in this family and made her feel like a guest in her own life. Also this day could shine a little brighter. Also Olivia could be the only one who mattered." Olivia let out a choked sound, somewhere between a sob and a protest. She turned sharply in her chair, her face crumbling. Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away, shaking her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. The photographers had lowered their cameras. The servers had stopped moving. The band had gone completely still. It was as if the entire wedding had frozen around this truth. Julian turned to me one last time, his voice quiet again. "You deserved better, Ava. You still do." He handed the microphone back to the silent server and walked away, not toward the exit, not toward the bar, but directly toward me. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only sit there, overwhelmed by the sound of everything crashing down around me, the gasps, the murmurs, the frantic whispering. The illusion was gone. The perfect image my family had crafted for years had cracked open, and the truth was pouring out, raw and undeniable. And in that moment, I wasn't invisible anymore. The morning after the wedding, the house was still, heavy with the kind of silence that settles in the aftermath of something you can't undo. My parents had returned from the venue late, and though I'd been awake when the door opened, I didn't come out of my room. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, letting everything sink in, the speech, the stunned faces, the shock that passed over the crowd like a wave, the collapse of a carefully maintained illusion that had shaped my entire life. By sunrise, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I walked into the kitchen where my mom was sitting at the island with her tablet in front of her, typing furiously, jaw clenched. My dad was by the window with a mug of black coffee, still in his undershirt and dress slacks from the night before. They both looked up when I entered, and for a second, it was quiet, like they were waiting for me to apologize for what Julian had said. Like I was the one who had embarrassed them. My mother opened her mouth first, probably ready with some sharp demand or accusation, but I didn't give her the chance. "I'm done," I said, my voice calm but sharper than I'd ever heard it in my own mouth. "I'm moving out." That stopped everything. My mother sat back slightly, stunned into silence. My father turned fully toward me, cup paused halfway to his lips. I didn't waver. I stood there, steady, my heart pounding but my mind clear. "I'm not staying in this house and pretending like none of this happened," I said. "You've made it perfectly clear where I stand in this family. You ignored my birthday. You made me work at Olivia's wedding like I was hired help. You kept money from me that was meant to help me build a future, because you thought I might get in the way." My mother began to speak, but again, I didn't let her. "Don't try to explain it," I said. "There's nothing you can say that will make 20 years of being overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten suddenly okay." She looked down at the counter, her fingers tightening around the tablet. My father, for once, didn't look away. He stared at me, his expression unreadable, but there was something softer behind his eyes than I'd expected. Something that looked like guilt, or maybe recognition. "I'm not going to keep shrinking myself just to fit into a space you've decided is all I'm allowed to occupy," I continued. "I don't care if Olivia's the golden child. That's fine. Let her be the center of your world. But I'm not going to be the ghost in the background anymore." My voice didn't tremble. Not once. After all the years I'd spent wondering if I was overreacting, if maybe I was too sensitive or ungrateful, there was something deeply grounding about finally saying it out loud. The truth had been sitting inside me for so long, pushed down, compacted, ignored just like I had been. But now it was out. It was real. And I didn't care if they didn't like hearing it. I turned to leave, already rehearsing the calls I would make. Madison had told me I could crash with her if I needed to, and with the trust finally in my name, I had options now. Real options. But just as I reached the doorway, my dad spoke. "I'll help you with the deposit," he said quietly. I stopped. I turned slowly, unsure I'd heard him right. He didn't repeat himself. He didn't over-explain or try to justify anything. He just nodded once, like it was something he should have offered a long time ago and was only now realizing the weight of that omission. It didn't undo everything. It didn't erase 20 years of being overlooked at every holiday dinner, every school event, every quiet moment where I waited for one of them to notice me and they never did. But it was something. A first crack in the wall they had built between us. And maybe, for him, a first attempt to see me not as an afterthought but as his daughter. I left that day with a duffel bag of essentials and the beginnings of something that felt like freedom. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I walked out of that house, not angry, not bitter, just certain. Certain that I deserved more than the scraps of attention I'd been fed my whole life. Certain that I wasn't going to live the rest of my years waiting to be chosen by the people who were supposed to love me first. For the first time in a long, long time, I was walking into a life that was mine. Not a shadow. Not a supporting role. Mine. It started slowly, quietly, without fanfare, just a conversation between Julian and me on a bench outside the apartment I had just moved into, the sun dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. I had spent so much of my life being overlooked, buried under the weight of someone else's spotlight, that I didn't immediately recognize what was happening when someone finally looked at me and saw not just what had been done to me, but what I could become. Julian didn't treat me like a victim, or a charity case, or a broken project to fix. He treated me like a whole person. And when I told him about the way I had felt growing up, like I was fading in real time while everyone around me clapped for my sister, he didn't flinch. He just said, "You're not the only one." Those 5 words opened a door I didn't even know existed. I'd been trying to survive my pain, but he made me realize I could repurpose it. I could give it structure, direction, meaning. So we began to sketch out something bigger than either of us. At first, it was just a simple idea, a local support network for kids who felt invisible, ignored not only by their families but by schools, by counselors, by any system that was supposed to nurture them but instead made them feel small. We called it the third row, after the seat I'd been placed in at Olivia's wedding, the seat that was supposed to keep me out of sight, away from the center, but ended up being the starting point of my entire transformation. I threw myself into the work with a clarity I hadn't felt before. I finished my degree in early childhood education, taking on double course loads and night classes, determined not to let any more time slip through my fingers. By the time I graduated, I had a binder full of program proposals and a list of schools that had responded to my emails with tentative yes. Julian helped with the nonprofit paperwork, leveraging connections I never asked for but was grateful to have. He didn't do it for credit, he never even asked to have his name attached, but he believed in it the way someone believes in a seed before it's bloomed. We started small. 1 pilot school, 1 classroom, 1 lunchroom table where a group of kids could come together every week and talk about what it felt like to be overlooked. Some of them were painfully quiet at first, afraid to speak, afraid to take up space. Others were louder, masking hurt with sarcasm or bravado. But they showed up. They kept showing up. And I saw myself in every one of them. The mentorship program grew. We added after-school workshops focused on self-advocacy, creative writing, emotional literacy. We created peer partnerships, pairing older students with younger ones who needed someone to sit beside them during hard days. I recruited counselors, teachers, community volunteers, people who had once felt invisible too and had found their way back to themselves. Within 2 years, we were in 5 schools. By the 3rd year, 10. Eventually, the district called me. They wanted to know if I could expand the program citywide. Every time I walked into a classroom and saw a kid sitting alone in the back, shoulders curled inward, eyes down, I remembered the girl I had been. The one who ate takeout on her birthday in a dark living room. The one who got her wedding invitation in the mail like an afterthought. The one who set up place cards instead of being asked to stand beside her sister. That girl still lived inside me, but she was no longer in charge. She had been transformed by something bigger, by purpose, by visibility, by the quiet revolution of being recognized. Some days I'd get letters from students, scribbled on notebook paper, full of spelling mistakes and heart. I didn't think anyone saw me until now. This group is the only place I can talk. I feel like I matter. Those letters meant more to me than any diploma, any award, any headline that eventually came when the program started gaining media attention. They were proof that the pain I had carried wasn't wasted. It had been forged into something solid, something that could hold the weight of others. I never forgot the beginning. I never forgot what it felt like to be on the outside, nose pressed to the glass, watching a life I was never invited to fully participate in. But I also never forgot the exact moment that changed everything, the moment someone walked across a crowded room, looked me in the eyes, and said my name like it belonged. That moment didn't just change my life. It gave me one. It started with a small, 10-minute segment on the local evening news. A reporter had reached out after hearing about the 3rd row through one of the school counselors who'd been part of our pilot program. I almost turned it down, nervous that it would feel performative, that putting a camera in front of the kids would cheapen what we were trying to build. But the journalist, a woman named Kara, was gentle, respectful, and genuinely curious. She didn't want a puff piece. She wanted the truth. She sat with me in one of the classrooms we used for weekly check-ins, surrounded by half-drawn posters and stacks of construction paper, and she asked questions that no one else had ever asked on record, about the emotional costs of being forgotten, about how it shapes your identity when your own family won't look you in the eye unless you're convenient to them. I spoke plainly, without naming names, but the story was unmistakably mine. I talked about the wedding. About being placed at table 22. About the moment I realized that I was no longer willing to let that be the role I played in anyone's life. Kara's crew stitched it together with shots of the kids at work, talking, painting, reading, laughing, and over soft piano music, a narrative began to unfold, not of pity, but of power reclaimed. The segment aired on a Wednesday. By Friday, the station had to repost it twice because the original upload kept crashing from traffic. By Sunday, it was being reshared on national education platforms. By Monday morning, I had hundreds of unread emails in my inbox: principals, superintendents, parents, teachers, donors, journalists. By the end of the week, I was sitting in the green room of a national morning show in New York City, staring at my reflection under studio lights, wondering how the girl who once couldn't get a birthday text from her own mother was now being called a champion for the unheard. I wore a simple dress, nothing flashy, and I refused the stylist's offer to change my hair. I wanted to look exactly like myself. Not polished into some digestible product, but real. When the host asked what had inspired the creation of the third row, I told her it was born from a moment of exclusion so deep that I felt like I didn't exist, and how that moment had made me vow to make sure no other kid ever had to sit in the back of the room, wondering if they mattered. The clip of the interview went viral again. Within days, donations began pouring in. Tens of thousands of dollars, then hundreds. Some came from celebrities. Some came from retired teachers. Some came from teenagers who had seen the video and sent in $5 with messages like, "I wish this had existed for me." We funneled the funds straight into expansion, training materials, part-time staff, transportation vouchers for students who didn't have safe ways to get home after sessions. Schools across the country began reaching out, asking for consultations, toolkits, partnerships. And back home, the ripple effects were immediate. My mother's book club, the group of women she had clung to like a social life raft, quietly stopped inviting her to meetings. No drama. No confrontation. Just silence. One by one, her friends dropped away, unsubscribed from her curated newsletters, declined her invitations to wine nights. Some of them had daughters. Some had seen themselves in what I said on air. My mother, who once obsessed over image and perception, was suddenly on the receiving end of the very exclusion she had orchestrated so effortlessly for years. My dad's friends started mentioning me more than Olivia. At barbecues, in emails, even in group chats that I wasn't part of but heard about through mutual acquaintances. They talked about my work, about the way I'd taken something broken and turned it into something transformative. The same men who had once stood around our living room, sipping drinks and praising Olivia's climb up the legal ladder, now asked my dad how his changemaker daughter was doing. My name was no longer an afterthought. It was the headline. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel vindictive. But I did feel a kind of quiet peace that I had never known before. For years, my family had tried to shield themselves from social embarrassment by diminishing me, by making sure that if I stayed small, I wouldn't cast a shadow on Olivia's shine. They feared what people might think if I didn't fit the mold they'd chosen for their family narrative. But in the end, the social consequences they once feared for me landed squarely on them. Because people saw the truth. They saw the girl in the third row. And this time, they didn't look away. What surprised me the most, after everything, was Olivia. Not her tears at the wedding, those had felt performative, the kind of public unraveling that comes when your world is cracked open in front of an audience, but what came after? In the weeks that followed, she reached out. Not immediately, not with a dramatic apology or a self-serving explanation, but with quiet, consistent messages. She asked if we could talk. I didn't answer at first. I needed space, time to understand if she was reaching out of guilt or genuine reflection. But she kept trying, and when we finally sat down, just the two of us, no champagne, no curated lighting, just a quiet cafe on a rainy weekday, I saw something in her that I hadn't seen since we were kids. Sincerity. Clarity. Regret, yes, but not performative regret. She wasn't crying for herself anymore. She was listening. She admitted she'd been blind, distracted by the ease of being adored, shielded by the luxury of never needing to question her place in the world. She told me that Julian's speech hit her like a slap she hadn't seen coming, and that in its wake, she'd started replaying our childhood with new eyes. She didn't make excuses. She didn't try to pretend she had always been the victim of circumstance. She said, plainly and quietly, I was a part of it. I saw you disappearing, and I let it happen. That conversation was the beginning of something real, something we'd never had before. We started meeting regularly. Not in the forced, artificial way that had defined our interactions for most of our lives, but with curiosity and honesty. We talked about things that had never been spoken aloud in our family: jealousy, favoritism, silence. She began volunteering legal support for the third row, helping us register the foundation in new states, reviewing contracts, helping navigate the mess of nonprofit compliance. She never asked to be the face of anything. She sat in the background, this time by choice, using her skills to make something better. Something that wasn't about her. My parents, on the other hand, struggled in the wreckage they had created. At first, they tried to spin the narrative, as they always had, offering half apologies wrapped in justifications. My mother sent long, meandering emails filled with phrases like "we only wanted what was best" and "you never said anything," as if silence hadn't been the very language they'd trained me to speak. My father hovered on the edges of my life, suddenly offering help with errands, sending clippings of articles about my work, awkward attempts at connection that felt 20 years too late. But the difference now was that I didn't need them. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't scream or slam doors. I simply stopped waiting. Waiting for them to love me in a way that made me feel whole. Waiting for validation, for recognition, for a moment where I could finally breathe without wondering if I was disappointing them just by existing. I had built my own life, one where I was seen, where I was valued, where I mattered. They could either witness it from the sidelines or not at all. Their punishment was never the headlines or the whispers or the way people in their social circles quietly turned away. It wasn't the interviews or the online discussions or the articles that painted them in an unflattering light. That kind of public fallout is fleeting. It fades. What doesn't fade is irrelevance. They were no longer the narrators of my story. They were footnotes in a chapter they never wrote, observers in a world they never helped me build. The power they once held over my choices, my sense of worth, my place at the table, was gone. And they knew it. I saw it in the way my mother's voice faltered when she spoke to me, like she was unsure of her script for the first time. I saw it in my father's hesitations, the way he paused before offering advice, as if realizing too late that I no longer needed it. I hadn't just stepped out of their shadow. I had stepped so far beyond it that it no longer reached me. The girl who once set place cards at her sister's wedding was now drafting legislation for youth mental health in underserved school districts. The girl who got her birthday forgotten was now receiving national awards for her work in education reform. And Olivia, she didn't just accept it. She supported it. She clapped for me, not out of obligation, but out of respect. We rebuilt something on ground that had once been scorched. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy. But it was real. And in the end, that was enough. At 24, I stood at the front of a high-ceilinged, wood-paneled auditorium, facing a long table of city officials, educators, and board members whose names I had memorized over the past several months. My palms were dry. My voice steady. I had rehearsed this presentation in my head 1,000 times, but now, standing behind the podium with a digital slideshow behind me and the seal of the city projected above, I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. Not like I had something to prove, but like I was already living in the truth of what I had become. The room was packed. Teachers from partner schools had come. Students from our mentorship program sat on folding chairs along the side walls, some holding signs, some just watching with wide, hopeful eyes. In the second row, my parents sat quietly, dressed for the occasion but without the posture of people who expected to be seen. They weren't at the center of the room, not holding court or whispering loudly to anyone who passed. They were just there. Present but irrelevant. Not unwelcome, but not essential. Julian was in the front row, his elbows on his knees, his attention fixed on me like he always did when he believed I was about to step into something bigger. He hadn't said much that morning, just handed me a coffee and squeezed my hand before I walked in. But his presence said everything. He had seen me before anyone else had, and now, years later, he watched without needing to take any credit for the space I now fully occupied. My proposal was direct, data-driven, but human. I walked the board through the 3-year impact report at the third row, measurable improvements in attendance, behavior, and mental health outcomes among students who had participated, testimonials from teachers and parents, letters from kids who had once been suspended for fighting and were now mentoring younger students after school. I didn't use flowery language. I didn't oversell. I just told the truth, about what happens when someone who feels unseen is finally told they matter. When I finished, there was no applause. Not right away. The board asked questions, serious ones. About funding, about oversight, about sustainability. I answered each with clarity, with numbers, with names and pilot outcomes and real, tangible impact. I watched their faces shift, one by one, as understanding replaced politeness. They weren't just listening. They were believing. Then came the vote. The board chair called each name. One by one, the responses came, yes. 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 Unanimous. There was a pause, just a breath of silence, a held moment between what had been and what was now, and then people stood. Not in a standing ovation. Not in some grand, performative display. But in a movement that felt like acknowledgement. My students clapped softly. My colleagues smiled. Julian stood without taking his eyes off me. My parents didn't say anything. They stayed seated. My mother stared at the table in front of her. My father looked toward the ceiling as if pretending not to hear what was happening. Maybe they were proud in their own way. Maybe they weren't sure what to feel. But for once, I didn't wonder. I didn't look to them for validation or read their faces for permission to be proud. I didn't cry. I had imagined that moment for years, thinking it would be some dramatic, cathartic release. But it wasn't. It was steady. Clear. Solid. I had taken the silence of being forgotten and turned it into a movement that now had the full backing of an entire city. I had sat in the shadow of my family's expectations for most of my life, made to believe that invisibility was just my role in the script. And now, standing at the center of a room full of decision-makers, advocates, and the very students who had once been left behind like I had, I realized something deeply simple but utterly life-changing. I wasn't invisible anymore. I had become the architect of something that reached far beyond me. And no one could take that away. On my 25th birthday, exactly 5 years to the day, they boarded a plane to Rome without a word, leaving me behind like I was a loose thread in a tapestry too elegant to include anything flawed. I hosted a dinner at my apartment. Not in some grand ballroom or luxury venue, but in a space that was entirely mine, walls painted in colors I had chosen, shelves lined with books and photographs that told my story, candles flickering against the soft hum of music I loved. There was no extravagance, no curated perfection, just warmth, intention, and presence. Everything that had once been denied to me, I had built for myself. The long wooden table was set with mismatched plates I'd collected from flea markets and artisan shops, each one with its own texture and story. There were fresh tulips in a heavy glass vase in the center, my favorite flowers, ones no one had ever bothered to learn I liked when I was younger. The food wasn't catered or outsourced. I cooked it with Madison earlier that day, filling the apartment with the scent of garlic and roasted vegetables, with the kind of laughter that rises from shared history and the ease of being understood. They all came. My parents arrived exactly on time, not fashionably late, not flustered, not controlling. My mother carried a bouquet wrapped in brown paper, white lilies and pale pink roses, and handed it to me without ceremony, her hands trembling slightly. My father offered a bottle of wine and a soft, unsure smile. They sat where I asked them to sit. They didn't dominate the conversation. They didn't try to reclaim space that was no longer theirs. Olivia arrived wearing a simple black dress, her hair down, face unadorned with the usual need to impress. She hugged me, held on longer than necessary, and whispered happy birthday like she meant it. She brought dessert, homemade lemon cake, and placed it on the counter like it belonged there, without the flourish of someone needing to be praised for her thoughtfulness. She sat beside me and didn't try to compete for attention. For once, she didn't have to. Julian was already there, having arrived early to help set the table, quietly refilling glasses and making sure the playlist didn't loop back to the same song. He sat to my right, his presence as steady and grounding as it had always been. He didn't need to say anything. His being there, his witness to how far I had come, was enough. At one point, when the dishes were cleared and the lights had been dimmed and the hum of conversation softened into a more intimate quiet, Olivia stood to offer a toast. She didn't use a script. She didn't choke on rehearsed emotion. She looked at me and said, "To my sister. For building something out of what the rest of us overlooked. For becoming the kind of woman we should have seen a long time ago. You didn't just rise, you changed everything." And then she raised her glass, and so did everyone else, and I sat there at the center of the table, not with a forced smile or polite nod, but with the full weight of that moment settling around me. This wasn't just a dinner. This was the reclamation of a life that had once been dismissed. This was the rewriting of a narrative that had been shaped without my consent for far too long. This was justice, not the kind that seeks punishment, but the kind that speaks for itself through undeniable presence. Because the truth is, I had never wanted revenge in the way people usually imagine it. I didn't want screaming matches or estrangements or the slow decay of forced relationships. What I wanted, what I had always needed, was to become impossible to ignore. Not through noise. Not through spectacle. But through a life so full, so purposeful, so deeply rooted in authenticity, that even those who once looked past me couldn't help but see. And that was exactly what I had done. The girl they left behind, the one they forgot on her birthday, the one who wasn't even worth a seat close to the dance floor, she had become the woman hosting the table everyone wanted to sit at. And she didn't need forgiveness, or permission, or apology. She just needed to live so fully that forgetting her was no longer an option.